wa ala Muhammad. We'll start the program with recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو الحسير ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا النذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات.
Wow. Thank you very much for the recitation. Today we're very fortunate to have Jahangir Mohammed, who will be speaking to us on analysing the aid contribution of UK Muslim humanitarian charities. Welcome to Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Jahangir is a prolific writer, commentator, Muslim global affairs, with a long experience, with 28-year experience of studying and analysing Islamic and Jihad movements. He's written numerous articles, been the director of the Centre for Muslim Affairs, Director for Centre for Muslim Affairs since 1997. He was the Deputy Leader of the Muslim Parliament of Great Britain. In his professional capacity, he's been a lecturer at De Montfort University in Leicester at the age of 23. He now runs his own consultancy business and is the author of Race Relations and Muslims in Britain, the Home Office Strategy for Islam and Muslims in Britain, and a range of other things you can see on the website on sikkim.org.uk. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. And thank you for inviting me to talk to you. It's the first time I've been here, and it's nice to see such a fabulous project that you've got ongoing. I hope when it's completed I'll be able to come back and see the final product. So I'm here today as director of the Ayan Institute, but also in my private capacity, has been mentioned. I work with charities, advise, represent charities, and support them for the last 10 years. But this particular report is part of a think tank that I set up with some colleagues just over 2 years ago called the Ayan Institute. And it's dedicated to working towards a Muslim world that is prosperous, strong, and capable of solving its own issues. So that's the vision. And we want to see a Muslim world that's united, independent, strong, prosperous, free of wars and conflict, and capable of resolving their own issues. And our framework document, if you haven't read it, framework report, which sets out our ideas and thinking, is called Creating a New Civilization of Islam, which sets out our conceptual approaches and our thinking. We're very much Ummah-centric, focused on the Ummah rather than on states, on unification and unity of Muslim peoples. And we're a think tank, not an academic institute, which there is a difference. Most of you will be aware, or you may not be aware, but for the last 3-4 decades, the world has changed significantly in that once civil servants and universities used to direct government policies and provide the advice and the guidance. That changed during the Thatcher and Reagan years when think tanks started to come up. And basically now government and government policies are shaped by think tanks. And if you've been following the war on terror for the last 20 years, and certainly in Britain, you know that some think tanks in the UK have been and still are very influential in government policy and also deciding laws, and particularly where Muslims are concerned as well. So we wanted to establish this, or I'd been wanting to do it for a long time, because we need our own think tanks. The United States has thousands, Europe has thousands, the Muslim world and the Muslim communities have very few. So I basically talked about that, why we need a think tank. And in our framework document, we identified a 12-point plan, or 12 areas that help to unify people and countries as well. So from that stem a number of projects. This is all on our website if you want to look at it in detail. I'm not going to talk too much about that document and the think tank because I'm here to talk about the charity report today, but you can download that and you can see on our website, on our Facebook, some of these issues and lots of articles around them. So aiding the Ummah, so a number of areas of work that flowed from our think tank. One was UK Muslim communities or minority communities around the world which are being persecuted, and Yahya Burt, one of our research directors, wrote a report before this one on Muslim minority communities around the world. And so that's there is a focus on that, with a specific focus on UK communities and our thinking around that, as well as globally in terms of economics, trade and refugees. So these are a few of the areas. So we wanted to do this because the concept of Ummah and really isn't that strong. It's, you know, people say it, but they don't really mean it. They talk about Ummah, but there is one area where Ummah does come into its own, and that's our charitable work around the world. That's when the concept of brotherhood comes to the fore. So we thought we'd look at it, given that this is a big sector. Obviously, I know a lot about the charities that I work with, but nobody had really looked at it in detail. And I was aware through my own work, I felt it was going in the wrong direction a little bit, or going in a direction which was away from that whole Islamic approach and more towards capitalist ideas about charities and how charities should be run. And I felt that there was a need to pull it back and bring it within an Islamic framework. So this is our humble attempt to look at that and to identify for the first time the charities. And the other reason, and I think it's important we understand that, is we are not really a empowered community. And some of the way the media covers us, the media just basically talks about the negatives of the Muslim community. There's very little positive. And we don't help because we also do the same. You know, we are the poorest, we've got this problem, we've got that problem. When we sit with government, we say the same things. You know, nobody wants to know a community that is a problem. And that is poor, and you're telling them that you need funds all the time and you need this. People don't respect that type of community. So we have to project some power and some strength as a community. And we have institutions in this country that we've built. We've done a great deal of work. We don't talk about it enough. So I wanted us to do that as well, and perhaps shift the approach. And of course, we have a huge problem. We have about 37 million refugees in the Muslim world, especially since the war on terror. We've called it at Ayan our Ummah of refugees, because we have more refugees than the size of some states. And, you know, they're getting bigger all the time. Sudan now, lots of other countries, Bangladesh, Rohingya. So something really needed to be done, because I work with a lot of charities and we see the work that they're doing, but you know, the work that's being done is feeding people, but those people are living in camps for decades and decades, and you're not actually getting them out of that miserable situation. So we needed a fundamental rethink around that. So this is a summary, really. So this was quite a revelation for us, because I wasn't expecting that many. So we focus mainly on, this is not about the mosques, this is not about UK Muslim charities, this is purely those charities that are working overseas at an international level with humanitarian objects. And I wasn't expecting, when I asked our research associate Beatrice to, we found a way of identifying them, and I was expecting, if I'm being frank, about 400, something like that. And there are 1,026 international humanitarian Muslim UK charities. And since this report, that's not a final figure, we've found about 20, 30 more that are, you know, raising £1 million or more. So it's a huge figure. And in 2020, the year that we looked at, it was a staggering £708 million raised by Muslim charities. And if you add to that the money that mosques raise and the UK charities raise, it would quite easily exceed £1 billion a year. And what we also did, we projected a modest growth rate based on the past, and even according to a modest growth rate, by 2050, we're looking at 4 billion. And that's based on things like more women are coming into work, more younger people are coming into work, but also the Muslim population is projected by 2050 to be, at the lowest projection, 10% of the population. At the highest projection, 17%. So, you know, you can see that the Muslim community is going to be a big source of charitable work, and raising that kind of money means really we should be taken seriously by lots of people. We have some 4,000 trustees, 4,500 employees, and over 10,000 volunteers. And there's been a 91% growth of Muslim charities in the last 20 years. And that coincides, it's not surprising, with the global war on terror, when a lot of Muslims, because of the war on terror, have been displaced in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, but many other places as well. But although we had 1,026 charities, actually the top 20 charities account for something like 76% of that income, with Islamic Relief Worldwide being the biggest charity, although they count their global funds in that. 4 of the top 20 charities are 100% donation, and and 94 million out of, so that's about 94 million. So a lot of charities are claiming 100% donation. There are issues around that. Don't want to get too much into that. And then outside the top 20, there are 21 charities with between 1 million and 8 million. And as I say, we found a lot more now. So that figure is likely to be higher. And then the top 11 charity programs were food distribution, education, medical aid, water security, helping orphans, emergency relief, refugees, winterization, development. Women, that's a big issue actually. Women's projects were very few, although that is mentioned there. The needs of women are not really being addressed in the way that they should amongst communities around the world. And food distribution accounts for a lot of the work. And most charities are doing similar types of activities. Zakat versus Sadaqah, I was hoping in the report that we'd be able to find out how much Zakat Muslims collect and how much they spend. But this is one area that proved difficult because a lot of the charities are not actually recording in detail how much Zakat they get and how much they are spending. But we spoke to a few and they said between 5% to 40%. It was surprising because we were expecting most of the money to be Zakat. Actually, most of the charities' income is Sadaqah rather than Zakat. So that's quite interesting. That means that they're not as restricted in what they can do. So this was lower than we expected. And there is a lax attitude, I would say, developing to Zakat, which people see it as a tax or as charity. And as you know well, that Zakat has a different philosophy and ethical approach in Islam. So we shouldn't be treating it. It's the right of the poor in your hands. So therefore, we shouldn't be treating it as just another charitable donation. So there are about 30 million refugees. That most of the charities operated across 90 countries. So there were 90 countries that all these charities were working in, but the focus was very much on 10 countries: Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Yemen, Syria, Palestine, Somalia, Gaza, Iraq, and the Gambia for some reason. And that sort of mirrors the ethnic population of Muslims in this country. So that's not surprising, I guess, in a way, although we were surprised by it. And the number of projects were 2,074 were carried out of 3,000 in 10 countries. Mostly in Pakistan, that's the biggest Muslim community here, and then Bangladesh, then other communities. So these are some of the tables that are in the report. As I mentioned, the trustees, employees, volunteers, income 708,000 in that year, and 610,000 was spent in the year, which is quite an achievement when you think about lots of charities are not really run by full-time professional workers. They have a lot of volunteers. So that's a huge effort to get that. Yeah, 708 million, yeah.
You said thousands.
Yeah. Did I say 1,000? Sorry. So the sources of the income, obviously most of it is voluntary donations. I was a bit surprised that government grants was only 2%. I thought there would be more, but maybe it's the way charities declare their information or record it in the accounts or to the Charity Commission is not as accurate as it should be. We know certainly some charities get NGO funding from international agencies. And income from overseas, again, that seems small, but I'm sure that that figure is a lot higher. We know that a lot of overseas income comes to some charities. So you can see the growth as well, the charity registration, the numbers just shoot up during the War on Terror period. And admin and growth spend. So 23%, so this is the growth rate year by year, 23%, 39%, and for some reason 2019 it was a minus, and then 2020 it was 143, and in 2021 it was already nearly 595 just among million amongst the top 20. But because not everybody has submitted their accounts, they submit them different times, you can't really get an accurate figure all the time. So in terms of the administration, you can broadly say that administration is spending on governance and admin, but also increasingly on fundraising. A lot of charities spend huge amounts on fundraising these days, and that's around 8% for governance and 8% on fundraising. So 16% is the average for administration. That's the growth in income. And then what we did, we thought we'd do the top 10 and 20. And as you can see, those are the top 20 Islamic relief worldwide. But even if you take away some of their other global income, they're still probably just the biggest charity. And then these will be familiar names to most of you. And those are the top 20. We did them for 2020 and 2021. There are some changes there, but at the end column in the 2021 we put percentage spent on fundraising and governance to show how much people are spending on administration in effect. And as you can see, that there are variations in that. Some are spending more, some less, but the biggest source of spending seems to be on fundraising, paying for fundraising, paying fundraisers, those type of activities. Those are the top charities claiming 100% donation. As I say, there's some dispute about that. The Charity Commission doesn't accept that there's anything called 100% donation, because they say even if you pay your accountant, that's not 100% donation. So this argument happens all the time, but some Muslim charities insist on using that, and what they usually say is we're spending 100% of what you've donated to the cause, but the gift aid that we reclaim, we spend that on administration. But even that, the Charity Commission would argue, is not correct, because the gift aid is part of the donation, the person's donation. So it's being challenged, but unfortunately one comes under HMRC and one under the Charity Commission. And those are a breakdown of the projects. As you can see, the variation in projects within the country, the percentages, top 11 categories that we've broken, broad categories. And then what we did is look at the types of projects within those categories. And although they've within the categories they put different things, they're more or less the same thing. So the types of projects are very similar. So the charities could really do a lot better in terms of actually being more specific about what they're doing, and maybe even think about different things that they should be doing. Again, types of projects in categories. So we put here the objects. So one of the things that we looked at is the objects, because most of our charities have humanitarian or religious objects, but we don't, like other communities, we don't seem to have a wider variety of objects, charities with objects. So human rights, fighting racism, you know, those type of things, advocacy work. We don't tend to have a lot of communities, charities that are doing that type of work. It's mainly humanitarian focused. Maybe that's something to think about in the future, and maybe one of the reasons we're not very good at getting our message across and our issues across. So the way forward, the report recommends, I urge you to download and read the report, that we actually fundamentally start rethinking how we do charities, and the approach that I'm suggesting is, rather than see them as charities, we should see it within the Islamic framework of this is the approach to Islamic welfare that is laid down by the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we should start thinking of it more in those terms. And some of the things we've looked at is how historically, you know, the first community of refugees was dealt with, for example, in Medina, where property and wealth was shared, people were enabled, and then later that was translated into Hijra law, where Muslims were basically, who were persecuted, had a right to go to any other country. They could go and trade in any other country, and they could work in any other country as well. So unfortunately, the nation state and the borders of nation states has determined our framework of thinking. So refugees, for example, we don't think in terms of helping them to settle in other parts of the world. We just leave them there and continuously, because it's good imagery, you know, it helps us raise funds, but you know, some of the charities I speak to, I don't know if you've been to Baruj al-Bajna camp in Lebanon. You should actually see some of these camps. The Palestinians, you've got wires hanging on these camps, and they've been building on top of building, and they have to pay rent for these shacks, basically. And they've lived in there for how many, 4 or 5 decades now. And they have restrictions on them, on what they can work and what they can bring in. So it's not really empowering them. They're not even useful to their own cause if they're persistently poor. If it was our relatives, we'd want them to come over, settle. And we've seen a different approach here with the Ukrainian refugees. So we need to rethink our work with refugees in particular. And one of the things that we've said is charities are not allowed to do political work and advocacy work generally unless it advances their objects. So here we've identified that actually dealing with the racism that refugees face, the discrimination, the barriers, charities should be doing more of that work, because that helps to relieve poverty, and that's directly linked to your object. So you can do that type of campaigning work around that. So there's a lot really in terms of that. The media, highlighting the work that charities do in the media. We've made suggestions for the media that they should talk more about the work that Muslims are doing. I mean, this is a fabulous story, and we did get good coverage in the charity sector and about the scale of this, and certainly within the Muslim community about the scale of that work. But also charities should you know, think about the concept of Islamic welfare. Instead of giving people food parcels, maybe think about what it would look like to look after a family, say, give them a year's income, like an income scheme, and you pay them basically until they become self-sufficient. Because part of the problem with food aid is when you purchase it locally, you destroy the local markets as well. And then in some countries, the aid gets purchased from another country. So in Turkey, Turkey benefited from the food all having to be purchased in Turkey. That really didn't help the Syrian economy. So we need to think more about how aid is done, how we make people independent, how we get them out of their circumstances, and also the type of work. I dealt with a lot of Syrian charities, many who were investigated, and one of the things that struck me was that people were providing a lot of food, but they didn't do anything else. You know how many lives could have been saved if they provided protective clothing for those children. I've seen children that because they got hit with a shrapnel piece from a barrel bomb, the only part of their body that now has movement is their head. And it's just a little touch and the spine, it destroys their spinal system. So maybe, we need to do a different thing. I'll constantly get requests from Libya for artificial limbs. They're buying them at excessive prices from European makers if we help them to make those limbs themselves in their own countries. So, and education is another big one. Education, maybe we should be, rather than madrasas, and we should be thinking about formal education as well and getting people educated, especially women. Women's needs are not really being thought about in refugees camps. I mean, it's like, yeah, food helps the women as well, but as you know, women have a lot of other needs. They are mothers, they have children, they suffer trauma. So there's a whole range of services and things that are not being looked at. But because they are not good for fundraising, they're not emotional, they don't have that emotional pull, people are not really doing that type of work. So this is the first of its kind. Hopefully we'll be doing more work on that. That's a summary again, most of that's been mentioned. So these are the two conceptual maps that we've produced about the Islamic welfare system. You can download it, it's in the report, and some of the goals that we think we should be focusing on. I think that's it, and that's a bit about Ayan. You can go on our website if you want to help us support our work. If you want to write for us, whatever, do that. We have a successful research associate program which we ran, and we had 90 applications. I was surprised. We were appointing 3 or 4 interns. We got 90 applications, and many were from sisters, and we appointed 20 research associates, and they learnt all the skills of a think tank and how to counter propaganda, how to work, how to change their skills from academic to think tank, and most of them, the 20, were actually sisters. We did it properly. We interviewed them and we did it on merit, and the sisters came through that process. So hopefully, if we get the resources, we'll repeat that program, and many of those people will go on to work in mainstream think tanks as well. There's a few more reports to come on refugees, on UK Muslim communities. We did do one on corruption. We actually were finishing one on corruption in Pakistan. The idea was to raise the whole issue of corruption in Pakistan, and then you know what happened in Pakistan. They removed Imran Khan, and the whole corruption thing got a massive publicity itself. So we have to refigure that report now in a different way. But good governance is part of the work that we do as well. How Muslim countries should be governed better and what they can do. So I'll leave it there for questions and answers, but do download the report and read it.
Thank you very much. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We have just under 10 minutes for Q&A. So yes, should we start?
Thank you very much, Jahangir. I have two sort of observation stroke questions. One is, as I see it, that some charities are spending up to 25, 27% on admin. I think 2 or 3 in the Muslim sector.
Yeah, I think the highest was 29%, and then some 25%.
But do you think there is a case for charities to raise separate funds for admin?
I think that's some charities are doing that.
Yeah.
So the ones who, some are saying they pay out a gift aid, some are saying we have a separate pot, some actually ask, do you mind donating X to admin? So I think there is a strong case for that, and people should do that. But, you know, one of the recommendations is that we as a community also don't ask enough questions of our charities. We should be demanding, you know, more information. There's no reason why charities, in the modern world, everything becomes institutionalized, and the relationships are between institutions and people. What I've said in here, this is not really an Islamic approach, because Islam also, it's necessary in some cases, but that shouldn't be you should also have a people-to-people relationship, and there's no reason why Muslims should not be encouraged to go overseas and see the work and, you know, get involved with charities more.
And the other one you mentioned, this is this area of advocacy and the sort of gray area between political activity and rightful advocacy and so on. Is there a case for drawing up proper guidelines for charities on to how to manage that aspect, do you think?
I think it's already there. I think it is there. I think you just need to be advised properly. And I think what people tend to do is they go beyond advocacy. So the advocacy has to be, if you're doing advocacy, you can be an advocacy charity for a particular cause, but if you're doing advocacy around your objects, let's say working with refugees or humanitarian aid is your object, then you can do advocacy around the issues of refugees, provided it's done factually and correctly and not politically. So that's the distinction. Where we get confused is people start making political statements or political commentary, and that's not advocacy. Advocacy is taking a detailed research view and saying to government, this policy, or, you know, the migrant issue at the moment, you know, you can talk about that. You can say that, you know, you can correct the misinformation that government is putting out about refugees. You can say that this is a wrong policy, that this was not beneficial to refugees. So you can do it as long as you do it properly. And once you start doing it, I think charities are afraid of doing it because Muslim charities have been under the microscope. They get investigated. But I think once you get experience of doing it, I think it's quite straightforward and simple. Obviously, the political parties, we have to stay clear of political parties in that sense. If you're, you know, you can't promote a particular party, you can't promote a particular candidate. Unfortunately, that's the area that it does happen. You know, for example, we have masjids that we call Labour Party mosques because we know that they're promoting which shouldn't happen. So I think it is possible, and others are doing it.
Perfect. Thanks.
Hello. Thanks very much for your talk. I actually work in international development, women's sexual and reproductive health and rights, so everything you said is music to my ears. But I had a few questions, and it's sort of related to what we were talking about advocacy. I don't know if do you have a view on if there are Muslim civil society organisations, how effective they are, because they might be a better place to do advocacy. I know you said that advocacy is not political, but very often it becomes political because you have to push against a political will, and politics is policy is politics. So I feel like that's a very difficult line to toe, and it takes a certain skill set and knowledge to be able to progress it. And I was wondering what your follow-ups to this report is. So how are you thinking about trying to approach charities or influence them to change their approach to, as you say, a more development focus, a more Islamic, actually enabling people focus rather than just doing a stopgap of aid and not really giving them the ability to look after themselves and progress with their life?
Yeah, so we've sent the report to some charities. Obviously, I work in that sector, so I have a lot of charity clients myself who are willing to work on those issues. But we hope to have some engagement, some meetings to bring charities together to discuss some of these issues. And we've sent it to some of the charities. We hope as a first, I mean, the issue is that we had was we launched it and then the Turkey earthquake happened and then Ramadan and now it's Hajj. So finding the time to talk to people who are all over the world and busy is difficult. But hopefully we will be engaging. I certainly engage and in touch with charities that I know. And some of them, even when they read the report, they said, come and tell us what we should do and how we should do it. So I'm positive. I think there's been a positive reaction from charities. They want to do things better, but maybe it's the how to do it. And there is the fear of advocacy, but I think we shouldn't. We need to do it. Civil society, some organizations, if they are purely political, then some of the comments they make might not get taken seriously. If it comes from a charity, say you're a homeless charity and you're talking about homeless issues and you're pushing the government in a certain direction with policies or saying this is causing poverty or that, then if it comes from a charity that's working with those clients, it's often better than just a political civil society group that's not really, that's working on a whole range of issues and not really clued in. So I think charities are best placed. I mean, who's better placed than humanitarian charities? They go and see these camps. They work overseas.
Yeah. Last question. Last question.
Thank you so much for your talk, and apologies I missed part of the question and answer, so this has been answered. It could be a very short answer to it. From the international humanitarian charities, one of the areas that always perplexes me, and it's somewhat answered by the source of the individuals, the conflict that has led people to be refugees, not just recently, but over generations, second and third generations being born into temporary, what should have been temporary housing, still being in those places. But it kind of feels to me that what we now term as emergency response is almost the new status quo after a period, and our emphasis is less on responding, but perpetuating what's happening in a very unsustainable manner, in a very undignified manner, in a manner that doesn't give any hope or imagination to those born in those situations. Instead, do you see any glimmer of hope within these charities to say that we can actually restore, with the poverty of resources, the poverty of hope and imagination, so someone can actually dream of a tomorrow and hope for a tomorrow being better than today, and actually being the contributor to charity, having been a recipient within the same lifetime? Because in my simple mind, if zakat is 2.5%, I need 39 people to work to support the 40th. If there's 39 beneficiaries and one person who breaks through, then you're perpetually sucking in charity from elsewhere. And that elsewhere may have its own needs that it's overseeing, that it's not going to be able to sustain. And then the wretchedness of the situations worsens, and and you feel that victim mentality perpetuating. So sorry, it sounds like a statement, but the question is, do we see anything?
It's absolutely right what you've said, and you know, people who go to these camps know that, they see that, but we have to find a different way, and we're hoping this has done that. And the more we talk about it, the more the donors talk about it. Say, look, I want you to do something different. I want you to help these people. You know, why are we not helping them resettle in other parts of the world? Why Europe? Why not Latin America? Or, you know, they're better there than they are in a camp, stuck there for the rest of their lives. Why are we not questioning policy? So we had this Turkish election, where the election was dominated by Syrian refugees. The Syrians, the EU paid Turkey to keep those refugees in Turkey so they don't come to Europe. They're not responsible for that situation. Turkey and the EU are responsible for holding them there, basically. And now they want to be, you know, the president wants to dump them between the Kurds and Turkey, so the Kurds and the Syrians start fighting, and then, you know, others want to send them back just immediately. So we have to, Germany took in 1 million Syrian refugees. Why is Europe not taking in its fair share of refugees? Nobody's making the case, even if charities said that. The impression we get is that these countries are taking in all the refugees of the world. They're not. It's mainly Muslim countries that those refugees are housed in. And this is going to become one of the areas that we've been looking at. There's a 12-country report on economic report we did. If you look at that one, the population projections from Muslim countries, if we don't get our economics right, if we don't get some of these issues right, we're going to have major problems with feeding people and the social unrest and the displacement. Places like Pakistan, Africa, there's the environmental changes mean there are going to be more people escaping and becoming refugees. So we have to address these as fundamental issues, and the way we think about them can't just be keep them in camps, give them aid. That can't be the solution.
Thank you very much. I know there are a couple more questions, but we have to break for Salat. Thank you very much, and inshallah, if you're around, people can still ask you questions afterwards, if that's okay. For a couple of minutes,
sure.
For a couple of minutes, for a little bit,
yeah.
not too long. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.